Hey guys, welcome back. Thank you for checking out my video. My name is Fantasy Fan Dan. Today I'm going to be looking at Game of Thrones Season 8 Episode 3, The Long Night, and I'm going to give an in-depth what if on how I think it really should have gone down. We'll be keeping just about the same canon from the TV show up until somewhere around Episode 2. This means that there are a few changes that I want to make to Episode 2 to better set up the context of this fight. First of all, I was not much of a fan of decisions made regarding the minor houses for this battle. The only two that really saw much mention were House Glover and Manderley, and that was because the former died and the latter stayed home. In my retelling, Jon was not so foolish as to allow the lords of these houses to leave. Instead, he insisted that it was far too dangerous to risk their lives and leadership with the upcoming battle approaching. Rather, the lords sent Raven to warn their lands of the incoming battle because they are far faster than horses. Keeping in spirit with Jon using his brains for once, he also decided to send Raven to Sansa, asking her to warn all the northern houses of the looming threat and to gather them to Winterfell. Consequently, all the northern houses will be present for this fight. I believe this to be reasonable and more than possible to accomplish since Dany was able to march her army from Dragonstone to Winterfell during this time. As a brief reminder, here are the northern houses mentioned in the show. There's House Mormont, Kerwin, Glover, Reed, Hornwood, Karstark, Tallhart, Manderley, Dustin, and Flint. These houses won't be playing a giant role in this fight, rather I'm just having them replace most of the heroes on the front lines as the de facto leaders of the defense of Winterfell. Okay, now we got the context set, let's begin. We'll pick up at the planning meeting we saw in episode 2. All the main players are there, but the decisions that they make are a lot different from what we saw in the original TV show. They still decide to use Bran as bait, but wisely they recognize the importance of that mission, and they decide to fortify his defense beyond a ragtag group of Ironborn led by Theon. Instead, we see Tormund speak up about how the Free Folk have suffered the most damage from this war, and that they deserve a chance to kill the Night King too. Arya also demands a spot in this mission, because she wants to defend her family, and if Jon's going to be on a dragon and Sansa in the crypts, then that means the best that she can do is by Bran's side. Of course, once Arya decides that she will be in the Godswood, then Gendry and Brienne are compelled to tag along in turn so that they can protect her. Which of course inspires Jaime to join the group as well so as to be by Brienne. Finally, Beric announces that the Lord of Light has sent him here for a reason, and so he must also be there to face this threat. And that's when the Hound declares that he goes wherever this fucker goes since he's the only reason that I'm here. With that, Bran's defenses are far sounder and, in my opinion, much more reasonable. The original show saw all the protagonists treat Bran's presence in the Godswood almost as an afterthought by just having the Ironborn there to protect him, when in reality it should have been the obvious focus. With these preparations made, Bran has over 100 defenders and all of the best fighters on his side. With that decided, they move on to the rest of the battle plan, which also ends up being much different from what we saw in the show. In this rendition, the main characters decide to use their brains when planning, rather than just tossing pieces on the board and hoping plot armor works everything out. The Northern Lords, Grey Worm, Ser Jorah, Davos, and Cahono lead the defense of the castle. Within the castle walls lie trebuchets, archers, and barrels of oil for dropping on whites when they attack the walls. Outside is a trench filled with oil and Frisian horses placed behind it to slow the assault. Behind that are the Unsullied, while the Dothraki and the Knights of the Vale are inside the wall, ready to charge out to help the Unsullied retreat. While in the battle meeting, though, Bran reveals a few other key differences to our heroes than what we saw in the main story. First, he announces that the Night King wants to kill him, not because he is the world's memory, but because there might be a way for him to stop the Night King. He doesn't know if that's true for sure yet, because he hasn't completed his training, but he has suspicions. I decided to make this change because I felt that the Night King's motivations for wanting Bran dead were a little bit flimsy in the show. It makes sense that his motivations for conquering Westeros would be mysterious, but I think that the logistics of his conquest should be a far greater concern for him than whether or not records of human achievement exist. Also, Bran, who can more or less see the future, states that Melisandre will be arriving soon, so they shouldn't waste oil in the trenches, nor should they spend time preparing any more dragonglass swords. All efforts go now to preparing arrows and spearheads. With the plans prepared, the battle begins. I see this battle going a lot more similarly to Helm's Deep and Lord of the Rings than it did in Episode 3, at least in regards to the main fight outside of Winterfell. The trebuchets launch volley after volley of flaming barrels of oil, but their impact is frighteningly inconsequential. Whites burn by the hundreds with each hit, but the army marches over their fallen comrades like a horde of ants. Once within range, the archers also begin loosing volleys, but like with the trebuchets, the overwhelming advantage of the whites make these attacks seem useless. But regardless, they keep launching attacks, slowly whittling down the army of the dead. When they reach the trench, Melisandre, surrounded by the Unsullied, set the trench alight much like as it was in the show, just in the nick of time. With that, the enemy halts. Trebuchets and archers continue to loose volleys, now making a more noticeable impact. The side of the living takes heart in this, and begins to wonder, might they really make it through? Meanwhile, the dragon fight with Dany, Jon, and the Night King goes the same as it was in the show. But when we flash to the Godwoods, things are much different. In addition to Theon and the Ironborn loosing arrows, the Wildlings and the rest of the crew are holding a much more tense line. Bran sits by the Godswood, flashing into the past, looking for a way to help turn the tide of battle. While he's doing that, Ghost sits by his side, ready to defend him should anything come his way. The line is holding for now, but people are dying far quicker than was expected, and the heroes seem to be having quite a difficult time as well. Back at the main battle, the Whites finally cross the Ring of Fire after losing thousands of their number from arrows and trebuchet volleys. But to the Unsullied on the front line, these efforts may not have even occurred, and they are soon overwhelmed in their attempts to hold back the horde of the undead. Even with the support of archers, they are soon forced to retreat. Back at the main battle, the Whites finally cross the Ring of Fire after losing thousands of their number from arrows and trebuchet volleys. But to the Unsullied on the front lines, these efforts made no difference, and they are soon overwhelmed in their attempts to hold back the horde of the undead. Even with the support of the archers, they are soon forced to retreat. When they do so, the gates open and outrush the Dothraki and the Knights of the Vale, who break into the undead, trampling their momentum. With this brief reprieve, the majority of the living Unsullied are able to make it back inside the castle walls, and as soon as they came, the cavalry retreats, archers shooting at their backs as the gates are closed. Over 20 Whites or so manage to slip inside the gate through the midst of this, but they are easily handled by troops under close command of a variety of competent and battle-hardened leaders like Jorah, Grey Worm, and northern lords like Howland Reed. As Whites assault the castle wall, lit barrels of oil are dropped, allowing the archers still more time to thin their numbers. As this happens, the Unsullied rush to the wall where they will use their spears and shields to stifle the enemy attack. Back in the Godswood, the team assembled there are barely managing to hold off the swarms of the undead, sustaining heavy casualties as they do. While they struggle to stay afloat, Bran is linked with the weirwood tree, traveling the past. He recalls how, by warging into Hodor in the past, he was able to control him in the present. With this in mind, Bran travels to the time when the Night King was made and tries to take control of him, to shape his thoughts. His efforts to induce him to forget his hostility towards man, though, as expected, prove futile. After all, Hodor was always Hodor to Bran, even before Bran became the Three-Eyed Raven. What Bran did to him was not a change in the present, but rather an event of the past. Bran realizes that he has to find a way to alter someone in the present for him to change the flow of battle. But who, when, and how was a mystery to him. To find the answers, he looked to the past, to the fallen kings of Westeros, the fallen heroes of the First Men, and Three-Eyed Ravens of years long past. Back at the main battle, the undead fall in astonishing numbers as they embrace the flames lining the walls, slowly putting them out with their ragged corpses. Before long, they succeed in quenching the flames and storm the battlements. Even with all of their stalling and thinning of the dead's numbers, the living must surrender their foothold on the wall. They retreat back into the castle, a last-ditch effort to hold on strong, as they vainly struggle for their lives. In the sky, the Night King sees that the battle below is all but won. His army swarms Winterfell like the rising tide. Reassured in his victory, he moves to end things with Jon and Dany. Here, things go more or less the same as they do in the show again. Rhaegal falls, as does Viserion. Dany looks to save Jon, while the Night King moves to find and kill Bran. Drogon gets hurt, Dany tries to save Jon, Dany then falls, and Jorah dies defending her. Following this series of events, the Night King leaves for the Godswood with his White Walkers. Viserion lands in Winterfell, and as we saw in the show, Jon gets stuck confronting the undead beast. But back in the Godswood, the situation is beyond dire. Almost everyone who stood to defend Bran has died or was injured. The main characters have just barely survived, and along with a few red shirts, they fight to hold a rapidly shrinking front line. Ghost growls by Bran's side, prepared to strike. This ragged team blindly struggles to keep their footing as the swarm assaults them, until suddenly, it stops. Somehow the motionless whites prove far more terrifying than they were a moment ago when they were screaming for blood. The temperature drops. As the seconds pass, a quiet crunch of snow can be heard as someone approaches. With terror in their hearts, the group falls back as far as they can to the weirwood tree. Through the massive swarm of whites walks the Night King and a group of White Walkers. As if on cue, Bran awakes at this moment and locks eyes with the Night King. He turns to his defenders and assures them that he's discovered what he must do. He has seen the future. He knows that they will win. This is met with wry comments from Tormund and Beric, but Jaime, Brienne, and Theon take heart in Bran's assurances. The Hound seems utterly unaffected. The Night King sends his White Walkers forward, and the group rushes to meet them. Redshirt Free Folk and Ironborn are ruthlessly ripped apart by the approaching monsters, but Tormund, Beric, Brienne, the Hound, Jaime, Gendry, Arya, and Theon cross blades with the beasts. These efforts prove futile, though. Gendry and Theon are the first to die, utterly outclassed by their superhuman opponents. Arya, in her attempts to avenge them, is recognized as a threat by the White Walkers for her speed. Because of this, they double-team her. One swings his broadsword at her, forcing her to block and causing her to lose balance. The other swipes down at her, but she dives away. It is then that she's met with a fierce kick, launching her through the air and shattering her ribs. The Hound sees this and yells in defiance at the death that is staring him in the face. He manages to slay one White Walker, but as soon as he turns around, he is forced to block a colossal swing that sends him flying into the weirwood tree, concussed and unconscious. With 4 men falling, Tormund begins an aggressive charge, letting loose a flurry of swings with his axe before narrowly dodging a counterswing and striking home at his target, shattering the blue creature. Like the Hound, though, his victory is short-lived. He soon finds another to face him. He tries desperately to parry the blows facing him, but he ends up with a blue blade in his shoulder, locking him to the ground. But before the walkers can land the finishing blow, he's interrupted by Jaime, who managed to separate himself from his prior engagement to rescue Tormund. With the White Walker distracted by this new entrant, Tormund falls back to the weirwood tree, as he can be of no further use with his axe arm so thoroughly wounded. He slumps down next to Bran, saying that if they're going to win, they'd better do it soon. Jaime, though, is no match for the White Walker facing him, but he has resigned himself to death and accepts this. He looks over to see Brienne one last time, but instead finds her struggling with her opponent. Jaime sees this, and he has to do something. He digs within himself and uses his anger and frustration to fuel a sudden burst of strength, driving him beyond his limits as a knight and as a man. But even still, it is not enough to escape the horror of the White Walker in front of him. Jaime is then met with a stroke of luck. Beric managed to escape from his prior engagement and saves Jaime from his struggle. He urges Jaime to help Brienne. They cannot afford to lose her strength now. And besides, the Lord of Light watches over Beric. He'll be fine. With that, he turns to fight 2 White Walkers at once, and to die one final time. Jaime runs to Brienne, but as he does, he looks back and sees Beric almost slay 1 White Walker before being killed himself. When he turns back to Brienne, he sees a horrible sight. Her sword arm clasped by the White Walker. The Walker aims a small grin at Brienne before prying her sword from her and thrusting it through her heart. Jaime let loose a bestial howl and leaps to engage the ice monster. His rage-fueled swing proves insufficient, though, and as his sword is blocked, it is freed from his hand, flying behind him. Utterly defeated, Jaime drops to his knees and cradles the dead woman in his arms. Only a few tears manage to fall from his cheeks, though, before an inhuman foot meets with Brienne's back, propelling the defeated pair into the weirwood tree behind them. With this, the battle is won, and the dead stand victorious. As the Night King slowly approaches Bran, the White Walkers return to the Horde. Jaime tries to recover, but only makes it to his knees before he falls to the ground and again holds the dead Brienne to his chest, quietly apologizing and cursing the world in between breaths. Suddenly, Jaime experiences a vision, as if living in the past. It's him, kneeling before Sir Arthur Dayne. Dayne says, "In the name of the warrior, I charge you to be brave." Jaime is suddenly back in the present. He looks at his hands with a confused expression, before a visceral anger surges through him. He raises his eyes to the Night King, and contorts his mouth, feeling deep within him that this being is unnatural, and cannot be allowed to exist any longer, as if Jaime were humanity itself, raising a challenge to the god of death. He hesitates, then draws Oathkeeper from Brienne's breast, setting it aflame with a visceral white light. As he rises to his knees, he sees another vision. "In the name of the maid, I charge you to protect all women. Now, "Do you swear to defend the innocent and the helpless in the name of the Seven?" Dane asks. Jaime cuts back to the future, unsure if he's hallucinating, but absolutely sure of what he must do. "I swear it," he says, climbing to his feet, reaffirming those oaths he took over 20 years ago. The Night King stares at the hobbling, broken man with a perplexed frown, as if recognizing him in that white sword. He has never seen him before, but he has. In response to this challenge, he draws his own sword and readies to fight the one-handed hero. As Jaime limps towards him, he flashes back to the day of Robert's coronation ceremony. Walking to the Red Keep with his father, he hears the crowd jeer at him, "Kingslayer! Kingslayer!" Jaime flashes back. He sees the Night King in front of him and hears the wind whispering, "Kingslayer," to him. He shakes his head, and with a small grin, he asks the Night King, "Do you know what they call me?" The Night King raises his blade, but Jaime jumps forward, slashing downward with all his might. The white-hot blade sears through the Night King's and cuts it in half, but the monster evades impact and, using his offhand and leg, swipes Jaime to the floor. With Jaime on the ground and off guard, the Night King raises the remainder of his sword. He brings it down on Jaime, just as the hero reaches to meet it with his gold hand. The false hand holds true, bringing a look of shock to the Night King, who meets with Jaime's eyes and then sees his own death. With a haunted smile, Jaime plunges Daybringer into the Night King's heart, ending the long night. Alright guys, thanks for listening to this video. As a added addendum, let me just state that the reason why Jaime's gold hand was able to catch the Night King's sword was because before the battle, he actually placed a little piece of dragonglass there, and he did this because when he was training with Bran, he almost lost his life, or lost a duel I suppose, by catching the sword with his hand. Knowing that the White Walkers would be able to counter such a move with their icy swords, he decided to put some dragonglass there so he could perform the same feat again if need be. Anyways, let me know in the comments what you think about this video, what you want me to talk about next, or if there are any other what-ifs you want me to do. Be sure to tune in this Wednesday for my review of the latest One Punch Man, and next Sunday for my point-by-point dissection of Season 8 of Game of Thrones. Alright, thanks for checking out the video, guys. Catch you later.